Oh,
Did not realize
I
that.
can introduce myself. Don't worry about it.
I have it. No, I have it here. So
Sorry about that.
Shepard Verbas, her pronouns, their pronouns are they and them, is the Director of Programs and Services at the LOFT LGBTQ and Community Center, serving LGBTQ and community and allies ages 18 and older throughout the Lower Hudson region. Since 2015, she has led the center's senior outreach program, Silver Connections, providing an outlet for LGBTQ seniors to engage in educational, cultural, and community building groups and events. Shepard also oversees the center's 50+ programs and services, specifically the LOFT's Helpline Program, LGBTQ and survivor advocacy groups, the annual Hudson Valley Trans Forum Conference, professional training, and facilitates several support groups. So it's my pleasure to introduce Shepard.
May I suggest that while Shepard is talking, everybody else remain on mute so we don't hear the background noises. And if you want to just see her, you can put your put it on speaker, or your gallery view will show you everyone. Just a tip about Zoom. Thank you, Shepard. Take it away.
No problem. Thank you, Hannah. And fabulous morning to you all. Thank you for being here. I just want to start by saying that it is it's a privilege. I always think that it's such a privilege to be in a space like this, to talk to people who are dedicated to the work that you all do. And I just want to start by saying that I am here today to talk about LGBTQ aging and the ways in which we might be able to best support LGBTQ seniors. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. And I want everybody to let me know if you can see it okay. Here we go. Here's my screen. I'm going to move something here. Slideshow. Okay. Let me get it up. Where's the chat? Okay. All right. Can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much. So, yeah. My name, again, is Shepard. We are here to talk about enhancing support services for LGBTQ seniors. I am from the LOFT LGBTQ+ Community Center. I'm going to tell you a bit about what the LOFT does. I'll tell you a bit about our senior program. And then we're going to get into aging, LGBTQ aging issues, and talk a bit about the differences between gender, sex, and sexuality, and cover all these fun fundamentals and things like that. So we're going to dive right into it so that we have enough time to cover everything, because of course we are talking about a very big topic right now, and the likelihood that we're going to be able to tackle all bases today in this brief time that we have together is it's just not possible. But at the same time, we're going to cover a lot of the foundations of things. So without further ado, this is me. Again, Shepard Verbas. My pronouns, so the words that replace my name in a sentence are they, them, theirs. I am a transgender, non-binary person. I have been with the LOFT LGBTQ Center since November of 2015. And I am the Director of Programs and Services at the center. As was it Louise or Hannah said, I do oversee the center's programming. I have since my beginning at the center, I have overseen the LOFT's LGBTQ senior program, which is called Silver Connections and serves LGBTQ seniors ages 55 and older. And the center was founded in 1983 in response to the AIDS epidemic that was devastating our community, as a resource for folks in our area, a local resource when one did not exist. We provide lots of different avenues for support for LGBTQ community members. The LOFT is actually a resource not only for LGBTQ seniors, but for LGBTQ people and allies ages 18 and older. We are located in White Plains, and we serve the lower Hudson Valley. So we have programs that span the 7 counties of the Mid-Hudson Valley region, and lots of localized programs. We do support groups for different demographics of our community. We do social groups and activities for people who want to convene around a hobby or interest area like singing or potlucks or things like that. We have assistance and advocacy programs, including the LOFT's Intimate Partner Violence Program. So we provide support to LGBTQ survivors of abuse. We also have a small scholarship of funds called Transmission, which is for trans and non-binary community members to offset costs related to transition. Health and wellness programs, which would include our senior program, Silver Connections, education, special events, including Westchester County Pride, which happens every year in June, and the Hudson Valley Trans Forum, which is an annual event specifically designed to serve and empower trans, gender nonconforming, and non-binary community members, which happens every year in November. And this is a bit about where you can find information on our website. We actually have 2 websites. The second website is a resource website, LGBTLifeWestchester.org, and then our contact information, which will be repeated soon. Don't you worry. So our senior program is called Silver Connections. Silver Connections has been it's been a really vibrant program of our center for years. We have senior community members, and the age range for Silver Connections is 55 and older, because I know everybody defines that differently. But our senior program has been in existence at our center for years, and our senior community is super engaged. We are Westchester County's only designated, I believe, resource for LGBTQ seniors. And we do lots of different programs with our community, including we have a 55+ peer support group. We do Silver Connections Lunch and Learns. We do several intergenerational programs throughout the month. And outings when we could meet in person. This was actually right before, this wasn't right before the pandemic, but this was, 2019. So we go to Fire Island, we go to parades, we go to the diner, we do things like that. Westchester Broadway Theater when that was up and running. And yeah, we have lots of fun trips that we do together in addition to educational programs and the like. What we're doing here. All right, so here again, we're today talking about LGBTQ aging. I want to start by saying that I am not a member of the LGBTQ senior community, so I am not speaking from personal lived experiences, and invite and recognize if anybody here in this space does belong to the LGBT senior community and wants to chime in, cut me off, whatever it is, please do. I know every single time I walk into this space that I'm not the only LGBTQ person who exists anywhere. I am not the only person with lived experiences, and am also not the only person that knows an LGBTQ person in their life. So I fully invite you to be a part of this conversation. I do work at the center and have worked with our community members and am sharing that knowledge. But either way, to set the space up, I do want to kind of hit home the fact that even when we don't realize that we're serving LGBTQ seniors, we are, right? Usually, we could ask like, oh, who here is serving LGBTQ seniors? Who here has groups for LGBTQ seniors? Who here provides services knowing that they're doing so for people in the LGBTQ community? And often what we hear is that people don't really recognize when LGBTQ seniors are in the space, right? They don't really know if they are or aren't serving LGBTQ seniors. And the kind of issue that that addresses is the issue of invisibility, right? We often kind of think of LGBTQ, the LGBTQ movement as this like movement that is focused on youth, right? A movement that's focused on really protecting young people in our community, which is very valuable. And I am not saying that it is not, but there is a certain age that I see people kind of ignore that people still have sexual and gender identities, right? You kind of like hit a certain age and then people ignore those aspects of your life. And we know that those aspects remain important and valuable and a part of the fabric of who you are, no matter what age you are, right? So often LGBTQ seniors are left out of the conversation, are left invisible, because there are not a lot of services that focus on their unique needs and perspectives. And I also want to kind of set this stage as saying that inclusion of LGBTQ identities and LGBTQ people is the best practice. It is not a special addition to anything that we do. It should be a fundamental aspect of what we do, right? Because we do want to make sure that we are including people in the fabric of every single aspect of what we do. So if we're providing services, we're providing resource navigation services, we want to make sure that we're doing that with an intentional LGBTQ lens. If we're providing housing resources, we want to make sure that we're thinking of all people who are accessing housing. If we're providing friendly check-ins, we want to make sure that we are doing so, that our volunteers are trained to provide affirming friendly check-ins to all community members and the like. Because we do have to consciously remember that even when people are not coming out to us, they are still there, right? Even when they're not disclosing their identity, they still exist. So, and honestly, being LGBTQ, it means so much more than kind of the media portrays, right? It's not all rainbows, it's not all pride flags and marches and things like that, right? I mean, LGBTQ people are just like everybody else. We have fully fledged lives and need services just like anybody else does, right? So LGBTQ seniors are accessing every service just like non-LGBTQ people. There's a really interesting kind of quote slash, I'm not a statistics person by any means, but a quote that I found from SAGE, which is an LGBTQ national resource for seniors. It says, as of 2021, New York State ranks among the top 10 states in terms of the percentage of its population that is lesbian, gay, bisexual, and or transgender. Of the estimated 800,000 LGBTQ adults in New York State, nearly 1/3, or 28%, are over the age of 50. Although a key part of New York State's rapidly growing elder population, LGBTQ older people remain largely invisible and face unique challenges in aging. And I will cite SAGE so that you can have them as a resource at the end if you'd like to do more research. So I have some questions to pose for you, food for thought. You can also type your answers in the chat if you want to, but keep them to yourself or post them and scream them out to the world. But I do want to kind of see if you all can rate on a scale of 1 to 10 your knowledge of LGBTQ identities. So if somebody came out to you and said that they were pan, like if you knew what that meant, or just a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being, I don't know so much, 10 being, I'll take the stage, Shep, go away, I'm gonna lead this training. Okay, so 1 to 10, your knowledge of LGBTQ identities. And then similarly speaking, 1 to 10, your knowledge of trans identities. So your knowledge of identities that are in the gender diversity community. And then I kind of want to also pose, and it's a food for thought, right? So food for thought, what age do you think it's appropriate to stop talking to adults about LGBTQ people, right? I mean, we have this kind of like notion, like I said, that seniors, that LGBTQ older adults don't exist. And also I've heard so many times, oh, don't tell grandma about this, she won't understand, right? What age do we believe understanding of LGBTQ people stops, and we should stop having that conversation? So food for thought, because I believe that age doesn't exist. I'm just gonna spoiler alert with you there. Okay, so the graying of America is this trend that the US Census, I guess I got from there. The graying of America refers to the dramatic increase in the size of America's elderly population due to the aging of the baby boomer generation. I'm sure that this is likely not the first time you're hearing of this trend, whether or not you call it the same thing, but we all know, we all are aware, we're all doing this work. We all know that the population of older adults is getting larger and larger due to the aging of the baby boomer population. This is an older kind of fact, but in 1 year from 2013 to 2014, the nation's 65 and older population grew from 44.7 million to 46.2 million. This increase was due to the aging of the oldest 4 years of the baby boomer generation. According to the US Census, starting in 2030, when all boomers will be older than 65, older Americans will make up 21% of the population, up from 15% today. By 2060, nearly 1 in 4 Americans will be 65 years or older. And this is just to kind of hit home the fact that obviously the need for senior services is always going to be there. I just changed that word in the top title to Gang of America, because if we really think about what's happening in the world, baby boomers who were born between the years of 1946 to 1964, along with all of the other generations that follow them, are the folks that kind of really saw the start of the LGBTQ movement as it is deemed in American history, right? Have been there from the beginning, have lived through so many things in the LGBTQ movement. And it is definitely necessary to point that out in terms of the impact of mental health and the impact of services needed for these community members. Until 1973, the term homosexuality was still considered a mental illness. And the classification was dropped. And gender identity disorder has been considered a mental illness until 2019, when the word was replaced with gender dysphoria. So, I mean, the classification of your identity as a mental illness certainly has lots of impact on the way that you see yourself, the way that you you interact with the world, and the advantages and disadvantages you have in life. Right, which is all systemic and lots of big things to talk about. But at the end of the day, the LGBTQ community often grow up with an internalized notion that their identity is wrong or taboo. And it is still true today that that happens, but it was especially true for our senior community members. And this is often enforced in every aspect of life, right? Believing that you have a mental illness, believing that you are somehow unfit to have a healthy, happy life, which is certainly something we'd never want to enforce as service providers. So I've been saying lots of just jargon and stuff like that. And I know that you all know what that means, but at the same time, sometimes I like to add clarity. So key terms to keep in mind while we continue talking: LGBTQ+, of course, I'm referring to lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans or transgender, queer, and questioning. Usually people say LGBT, that's cool. Some people say LGBTQIA2PD, and the list goes on, and that's fine. Usually I'll say LGBTQ or LGBTQ+. It means the same thing. TG and CNB is a newer acronym that not too many people know about, but is kind of breaking down the gender diversity aspect of the LGBTQ community. So it stands for transgender, gender nonconforming, and non-binary. And I can get to what each of those words mean. Cisgender is any person who does not identify as a member of the TG and CNB community. So any person who is not trans. It is really, really super important to remember that every human being on the planet has sexuality, and every human being on the planet has gender, right? And has some sort of relationship to those concepts, right? You can be straight, and straight can be your sexuality. You can be cisgender, and cisgender can be the descriptor for your gender, right? You can be a cisgender woman, a cisgender man, right? And that cisgender just says that you're not trans. Right, cis is a Latin root. It means on the same side. Trans means on a different side or whatever. So they're both like Latin origins. You can say trans or cis, transgender or cisgender. Just like transgender is an adjective, cisgender is an adjective. And it is really super important to center that, because if we say people are transgender and we say people are transgender women, transgender men, transgender people, we are othering them, right? We are othering people because we are saying that anybody who is not that transgender woman, anybody who is just a woman is like quote unquote like normal or typical, and those are things that we want to avoid because trans people are normal and typical and and beautiful and valid and all of these things, right? So if we're going to give somebody a label, we're going to give somebody else a label too. So trans and cis. We're going to go quick through these things, but we're going to talk about the differences between sex, gender, and sexuality, some terms, the movement, statistics. Like I said, I'm not a statistics person, so there's not going to be too much of that, but supporting LGBTQ seniors, and then we're going to have lots of time for a Q&A, hopefully, if all goes to plan. During that Q&A, I just want to make sure that we center that.
Excuse me, someone else has some background noise and I'm having trouble hearing. Make sure to turn off your
Okay,
speaker.
thank you.
Please turn off your speaker. Please
yeah.
make yourself mute. Thank you, Karen. I think that was one of the people. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so when we do get to the Q&A, just like being mindful and respectful of the fact that like lots of people are here and we want to hold space for questions in a respectful manner, but we'll get to that. But anyway, so diving back in to navigating identities, there are lots of misconceptions about the differences between sexuality and gender, and also between sexuality, gender, and the way somebody expresses themselves. So I'm going to show a graphic that hopefully can, I don't know, add clarity to that. I found it helpful. This is not a graphic that was created by the LOFT. It was created by Trans Student Educational Resources, or which is up in the corner. You can Google it. It is called the Gender Unicorn. I personally love it and think it does a great job at just kind of giving a visual cue of these different aspects. So you'll see the unicorn on the side of your screen, and then on the other side, you'll see different kind of words and classifications. So this first one is sex assigned at birth. It says it is an anatomy, right? An anatomical classification that lots of people link to gender identity, but is not the same. So sex assigned at birth is a person's physical anatomy, right? Their genetic makeup, their internal and external characteristics that medical professionals deem as female, male, or intersex, right? All three are technically medical terms. And like I said, usually, like with a gender reveal party, right? Usually people say when somebody discloses that they're having a baby, they're like, oh, you know, is it a boy or a girl? What we're talking about when we ask questions like that is sex assigned at birth, right? We're talking about sex. We're talking about the only way that we know the baby's anything is because of their physical body, right? So sex is bodily characteristics. Sex is not gender. Gender is internal. Gender is an internal construct of how you feel, how you think, how you perceive yourself in relation to the world you live in, right? So gender is female, male, or anything else in between, right? Usually people assume gender is just female or male, right? Usually we kind of say, your sex assigned at birth is female, you must identify as a female, right? Your gender must be female. Or we say your sex assigned at birth is male, therefore you must be male. That is not true. That is just not true. There's so many people on this planet for that to be true. It would be amazing. There's a lot of diversity in terms of gender. There's also a lot of diversity in terms of sex. Intersex people are as common as redheaded people, and intersex people is, intersex is the term that describes people who don't have physical or internal characteristics that neatly align with the binary sex description of female and male. But gender, just like sex, is diverse, and there's lots of different ways that you can identify your gender. Lots of people think that gender identity and the labels people ascribe to gender identity are new or even quote unquote made up, right? Especially, you know, with people who serve seniors or even the senior community themselves, because there is a newer dialogue happening with gender diversity. There is that trope that like, okay, this is made up, this is new, this is invented. But gender diversity is certainly not new. Gender diversity has been a part of our culture and our non-dialogue, but our dialogue among gender diverse communities for literally since the dawn of time, since humans have existed. There have been people who have strayed, quote unquote, in terms of gender normativity. So gender identity, and one of the terms that we talked about before, non-binary, could be, you know, fall under the non-male, non-female category. Like I said before, I'm non-binary. And what that means for folks is different, but essentially it means not identifying as female or male. Binary, meaning those two options. Gender expression is the outside external appearance of somebody, right? So how you present your gender to others, how people perceive you based on external cues. Gender expression is even your name, your pronouns, right? Like how you cut your hair, how your body language and your mannerisms, right? All of these things are expression. Note that that external cue of your expression does not equal your gender identity, which does not equal your sex. All three are separate, okay? So we can have somebody who is completely masculinely presenting, right? So, and identify as female. And we know that that is, I'm sure that we can name a few people in our lives who never wear makeup and never wear anything that's feminine, don't wear dresses, don't wear heels and the like, and are female. Right? Because we understand that expression does not equal identity. So when we're serving seniors, we really want to be conscious of the fact that we're not enforcing harmful notions. That's how somebody appears on the outside is how they are identified on the inside, right? Which is why we always want to use inclusive language. We always want to remain open-minded, and we always want to ask questions sensitively because we never know. I'm going to skip that. And I'm just going to hit on this really quick. So intersectionality is not necessarily an LGBTQ movement term. It is a term linked to racial justice and racial equity, a term that was coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 to discuss the ways in which every human being has intersecting identities that they carry into a space with them that must be accounted for and cannot be disconnected from one another. So Kimberly Crenshaw coined this term because for her, she was seeing that there were cases of discrimination in employment, specifically around the fact that employers were saying that they had protections for Black people and they had protections for women, but they had no protections specifically for Black women. Right, so they said, "Oh, we protect Black people. Look at all the Black people that we have employed, right?" And they were all men, right? And then we say, "Oh, well, we protect women. Look at all the women that we have, and they were all white, right?" And she was in this intersecting place where there were no protections specifically for her, and it's a really, really important concept to center. Because LGBTQ people are not all white, LGBTQ people are not all one age, LGBTQ people exist in every single demographic experience, every demographic, every religion, every age, race, culture, everywhere in the world. And we bring those into the space with us, right? So centering that means that, again, not all LGBTQ seniors are going to bring the fact that they're LGBTQ to the forefront to you for multiple reasons, but it might not even be the main thing on their mind, right? And that's fine. That's fine. There are lots of other things that we carry into a space. It doesn't mean that they're shameful of their LGBTQ identity, and it doesn't mean that their LGBTQ identity doesn't exist, right? So just being mindful of the fact that we all carry identities into a space with us, and they all equally matter, even if we don't vocalize them, or maybe we don't even feel safe to. So moving on to the specific reason we're here today, talking about LGBTQ aging. Like I said before, the LGBTQ community is seen as a kind of, the movement of the LGBTQ community is seen as a newer movement. You notice I clarified myself because I was going to say that we're seen as a newer community, but we are, like I said, have existed since the dawn of time. Since humans have existed, we have been here. We just have not been documented and not been talked about and not been given rights and all of these things. So, but in centering the fact that, again, our senior community members have lived through so much incredible change in their lifetime that absolutely 1000% impacts the ways in which they interact with the world today. I wanted to go through and kind of unpack a few of the kind of key points in LGBTQ history to show how things have changed and evolved and what people are bringing into the space with them. So the beginning of the LGBTQ movement, lots of people cite the Stonewall Uprising, which was 1969, but actually in this country, it actually kind of formally started with the Mattachine Society in 1950. And it predates the Stonewall riots by 19 years. So the Mattachine Society was an organization that was for gay men specifically, and they're known for picketing lots of different places in full suits, because the common narrative of that time that existed long after that time was that LGBTQ people were mentally ill, were people who should not be trusted. And so the Mattachine Society said, we are just like you, right? We're here, we're just like you, look at us. So important, because 1950 was not that long ago. 1955, the Daughters of Bilitis, I've heard it pronounced different ways, is a lesbian organization, so a lesbian rights organization that was founded and has later developed different chapters around the nation, the country. And similar to the Mattachine Society, did pickets and protests and things like that around LGBTQ rights and demanding LGBTQ rights. So 1955, again, predating Stonewall. Between 1956 and 1970, there were several things that happened for the LGBTQ community. In 1956, James Baldwin published his first novel, which had lots of bisexual undertones. 1963, the first gay rights demonstration in the US takes place about discrimination in the military. 1966, the Compton cafeteria riots broke out in San Francisco when trans women were denied service and arrested for breaking gendered clothing laws that existed. In 1969, of course, everybody knows the police raided the Stonewall Inn in New York City, and that leads to 4 days of struggle and resistance between the LGBTQ community and police. That lots of people cite as the birth of the modern American gay rights movement. 1970, the first LGBTQ march, Gay Liberation Day march, was held in New York City. And Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera co-founded an organization called STAR in 1970 for the trans community. In 1982, nearly 800 people were affected with GRID, which was later changed to be known as AIDS by the year end. In 1987, ACT UP was founded in New York City to bring attention to AIDS. In 1998, Matthew Shepard, a gay Wyoming college student, is brutally beaten and left for dead. In Wyoming in 2003, the US Supreme Court overturned sodomy laws, proclaiming rights to privacy and decriminalizing homosexuality. In Lawrence versus Texas, I'll repeat, that was 2003, that is not long ago. In 2004, Massachusetts becomes the first US state to legally recognize same-sex marriage. In 2009, President Obama signs the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jones Hate Crimes and Prevention Act. which expands the US federal hate crime law to include crimes motivated by a victim's actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. In 2011, the US military policy "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" officially ends, allowing LGBTQ people to serve openly in the military. In 2013, we all know the US federally recognizes same-sex marriage, striking down DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. In 2015, we know this even more. The Supreme Court rules that states are constitutionally required to allow to issue marriage license to same-sex couples. In 2017, Trump's Housing and Urban Development Department withdrew 2 notices impacting LGBTQ people. The first was for emergency shelters receiving HUD funding to post information about LGBTQ people's rights to access shelter. And the second was related to youth homelessness in a discriminatory manner for LGBTQ youth. In 2018, there's a lot of things, right? So in 2018, the Trump administration intended to redefine sex to intentionally exclude LGBTQ people and their families from non-discrimination protections. In 2019, former President Trump banned trans people from openly serving in the military and allowed medical providers to cite their personal beliefs in refusing to provide broad spectrum of services to LGBTQ patients, specifically to trans patients. And the Interior Department deleted sexual orientation from its anti-discrimination guidelines in 2020. But also in 2020, there were several LGBTQ Supreme Court victories: Bossack versus Clayton County, Altitude Express versus Zarda, and RG and GR, Harris Funeral Homes versus Equal Opportunity Commission, which the central question of all 3 of these cases was whether the 1964 Civil Rights Act protection against sex discrimination also applies to cases of discrimination based on an employer's gender identity and sexual orientation. And the answer was yes. That's important. That's important to know because we are all living in these times and we have all seen this news, and hopefully we all know about these stories. But when you're personally impacted by them and your entire life depends on what's being stated and debated, and it's a constant, one year you have rights and 1 year you don't, and 1 year people like you and 1 year people don't, and should you be closeted, should you not, I mean, it is just, it's a ton of back and forth that is certainly important to center, especially in reminding ourselves that people don't all exist in the same experiences, right? So the experiences a white gay man might have are vastly different than a Black trans woman, and their experiences throughout life and the impacting different ways in which racism and ageism and sexism and all of the isms impact and make life challenging are super important to center when we are talking about supporting LGBTQ seniors. I'm going to go through these quickly just to kind of, really drive home the fact that LGBTQ seniors need support. Nearly 60% of LGBT older adults report feeling a lack of companionship. Over 50% reported feeling isolated from others. Usually in the kind of scheme of how we rely on people as we age, we first turn to spouses. If we don't have a spouse, or if our spouse is unable to help us and we need help, we go to children. If we don't have children, right? So if we don't have a spouse and we're LGBT and we didn't have children, which is not the case for all LGBTQ people, mind you, but if you don't have children, maybe you'll turn to parents or siblings. And what if your family doesn't, I don't know, lots of LGBTQ seniors are estranged from families for whatever reasons. Then you might turn to other relatives, and subsequently you might turn to friends. The beautiful thing about the LGBTQ community is the notion of families of choice, which is the reality of what lots of LGBTQ people do is designate families of choice when their families of origin desert them or don't understand them, or they have a strained relationship in some way, is relying on these families of choice. The issue with families of choice and the issue with turning to friends as you're aging is that your friends are aging with you. And that is a really important thing to center, because when we continue talking about services and providing services to LGBTQ seniors, we often see that LGBTQ seniors do not feel seen in assisted living communities, are not asked about their identities, are told to be closeted, or are meant to feel like they must be closeted, experience discrimination, and don't have anywhere else to go. I mean, they need support, they need somebody to help them, right? So many LGBTQ seniors decide to conceal their identity due to homophobia or transphobia or biphobia and discrimination. And it's just a really unfortunate reality that a lot of seniors face, again, because we kind of assume that LGBTQ seniors don't exist. Lots of people who are providing the direct work are amazing people providing the direct work. Don't misconstrue me. Don't get me wrong. It is amazing to do work with seniors. And also, I mean, not asking somebody what their sexual orientation or gender is, not asking pronouns, assuming identity, assuming relationship status, assuming that if somebody was in a straight relationship means they're straight, is all harmful. It's all harmful. It all pushes people further back in the closet. It all, not having representation, not seeing yourself makes you feel like you're not welcome, right? And we never want that, right? Because perceived discrimination is just as damaging, or maybe not just as damaging, but is damaging just like actual discrimination is, right? Feeling like you're not going to be accepted is damaging, like actually not being accepted is, which is just an unfortunate reality. And similarly, many LGBTQ people face housing discrimination, which we did sort of talk about. And we hope that this lessens, and we see that this is lessening, but at the same time, housing discrimination, specifically with the trans community in terms of like legal documentation not matching, and then when, people who are leasing to you or people who are helping you with the housing process in any way find out that you're trans, and then, you face discrimination. And so also just painting the picture as a whole, right? Because when we do talk about the LGBTQ community, we are not solely talking about same-sex relationships. We are also not only talking about people in relationships. We're talking about gay people that exist singly. We are talking about trans people. We are talking about bi people who are in quote unquote heterosexually appearing relationships, right? We are talking about the gamut, because the LGBT community is diverse. We do not look like one thing. Okay, so in closing, I wanted to pose a few thoughts, if you will entertain me. So supporting LGBTQ aging adults, and we can talk about this more, in the Q&A part, but how does your organization actively engage LGBTQ senior clients, right? So food for thought, as we step away from this workshop and we go back to our lives. How does your organization actively engage LGBTQ senior clients? Do you, right? No shame if you don't, but also we could do better if that's not the case, right? Consider how you provide direct services to clients, right? So in all of the ways, right? Resource navigation and screening, counseling, housing assistance, direct care, whatever you do for clients, whatever you're doing for seniors, how are you actively engaging LGBTQ senior clients? How does your organization engage in policymaking which supports the specific needs of LGBTQ seniors, right? So if your organization has policy, which I assume they do, how are you actively including service provision to LGBTQ seniors in that policy, right? So backing up actually for that first question, when we do think about this question, I want us also to kind of think, does our staff or team assume gender and sexuality of our clients based on external cues? Does our staff or team share pronouns with the people that we're serving? And are our staff trained to sensitively meet the needs of LGBTQ populations and LGBTQ seniors specifically? And also, does our staff know if somebody does, come out as LGBTQ, like what resources are available for them, right? Like if I'm referring somebody, do I know that that resource is affirming? Do I know that the LOFT exists? Do I know the number to call the LOFT? Whatever. Do I know what services the LOFT provides and things like that? On this question, right, when we're thinking about policy, think about if your organization's rules and training support the needs of LGBTQ seniors. So have all of your staff been trained, right, on LGBTQ best practices? And does your organization have a commitment to the involvement of LGBTQ seniors in every aspect? So, right, if you do provide multiple services, is the commitment to including LGBTQ seniors universal? And do your policies at your organization address safety and discrimination among LGBTQ seniors? And then how does your organization's outreach material and intake process represent LGBTQ senior clients? Think about flyers, your brochures, your hotline, if you have a hotline, your intake forms, your phones, your things like that, right? How do your outreach materials include LGBTQ seniors? Do you explicitly state on those materials that you serve LGBTQ seniors? Do your printed materials display diverse images of the community? When you do an intake or when you do a new client form or whatever, does that allow LGBTQ community members to self-identify? Again, do you ask pronouns? Do you ask gender? Do you ask sexual orientation? And does your organization have have a system in place that allows people to record names and pronouns that are different than a legal document, which is super important? And how does your physical space represent LGBTQ seniors? Think about how your website, your office space can make LGBTQ seniors feel safe and included, right? Is information about community services readily available, like the LOFT and things like that? And yeah, I mean, visibility is key, right? So people who are looking for cues that you're affirming will look for cues that you're affirming. A rainbow goes a long way, just saying. All right, resources and questions. Here are the resources that I promised. The LOFT is at the top. That is my email address. And then SAGE, which again is a national organization. They do great work for LGBTQ seniors. UCLA was the resources that I kind of like used the data from. And then Centerlink. So Centerlink is just a good organization to be aware of. They compile a listing of all LGBT centers in the country. And there's just, like I said, a wealth of information. So yeah, and we have some time. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I am going to go back to everybody. And okay, cool. So here we are. So we have some time. I guess I'll pause the recording now, right, Jennifer? Does that sound good to pause the recording? And then we can get into questions.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'll pause.
Whatever you feel comfortable with. Yep.
Yeah, just so that people can ask questions.